Please welcome Charles Melton, Julianne Moore, and Todd Haynes. Welcome,
Thank you,
welcome,
guys.
welcome.
Thank you for that.
Thank
Welcome.
you.
So nice.
Todd, this is, I love this film. I've told you already. It seems so deceptively simple, the story, but then I've seen it several times, and it keeps refracting. You know, the alliances. I mean, the people. I trust her at times. I'm so mistrustful of her at other times. Was that always there when you read the script? This refracting quality to the script.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was there in the script. It was a remarkable piece of work, that script, Sammy Birch's script. The first script that she's produced, that's come to production, that came to me. Natalie Portman sent me Sammy's script in 2020, and yes, Roger, it had that. And it was everything you just said, deceptively simple, but you realize you're observing the tips of the iceberg. You know, it's only the most manifest thing that anybody can ever say that's said. And you know that it's all about what isn't being said or what is not capable of being said, or that what is being said are the things that people repeat, you know, and the narratives that they build to sustain their lives and their relationships and their choices. And of course, this example is a very extreme one, particularly with Gracie's character. But then there's things you see about the blind spots in Natalie Portman's character as it unfolds. But I felt what I loved about the script, and what was that I felt this was also just a very human thing, that we all do this.
And Julianne, the same thing can be said about Gracie. It looks like it may have been a very simple character to portray, but no, it's probably one of the hardest things you've ever done, correct?
It was so challenging. It was so challenging. And I actually remember, because this is, you know, happily, this is my 5th collaboration with Todd. So I was so grateful and so excited to do this. And there was a period where I might have had a movie right in front of it, and I was sort of worried about scheduling. I was going to have to go right from that into this. And I was in the car with my husband, and I said, it's okay, I can do this, because it's Todd, and I can do this. And then the movie fell apart, the one I was supposed to do, and I started working on this script, and I called Todd. I said, I can't do this. This is too hard. It was crazy, because as I started, we're talking about the simplicity of the script, as I started to pull it apart and try to figure out who she was and how to play her, I was like, man, I am confounded by her. I'm her willful denial of this actual situation, the narrative that she's promoting, the distance between that narrative and the transgression was so vast, her emotional volatility, all of that stuff, and then also just even in a concrete way, coming up with mannerisms that would be, you know, pertinent and to Gracie, but also be something that Natalie could mimic as we progress. So it was complicated emotionally, and then also really complicated technically.
And those traits that you mentioned, you had to do them quickly, because Natalie had to come in and then start mimicking, right. Correct?
And Todd, you know, Todd was very clear about that with me too. He's like, you know, we need to think about what this is, you know, so that we have somewhere to start. So, you know, because we were going to be shooting this pretty chronologically, but you know, quickly in 23 days. And so it was in that examination of what her narrative was, which is of a great romance, you know, that she was rescued by a prince, and the prince happens to be 13 years old, you know, but she remains a princess, and she remains, and childlike, you know, and so that belief. And then what are the signifiers of that? Like what, you know, she's very genderized. She's really culturized in this hyper femininity, and then this sort of childish presentation. And so I hit on this idea of like a vocal thing, a lisp, which is something we think of with children. And then that was something that Natalie then had to be able to work with.
Yeah, and the feathered hair,
Yeah,
and the pastel
gestures
colors.
and the, you know, yeah, all of that stuff, yeah.
Amazing. Charles, you also went through a major transformation. You gained weight, but I noticed your physicality. When you speak, your mouth is really tight, and the way he walks. Can you tell us about transforming yourself into?
Yeah, it really started with Sammy Birch's script. I mean, there was so much in between the text and the complexity of these characters. And I felt this immediate kind of intuitive connection to Joe and who this man was. And, you know, understanding that at such a young age, he was given the responsibility of being a father at 13 and really thinking about that and how that would kind of manifest from like the internal emotional makeup of like this repression of like this deep rooted tragedy, and like how he could how to like tell that story physically, because he, you know, as you can tell, he's pre-verbal, there's this repression, this not wanting to take up space, but communicating so much in just the way he moves in life. And, you know, I realized with Joe, he had to create this adaptive adult child in order to survive, where his body was growing, but internally, you know, he doesn't really ever acknowledge or ask the questions that I think the audience is asking as we're watching Joe. But I feel there's so much that can be said by doing so little with Joe, and that was just really Todd creating this environment and this trust on set to just really exist with Joe and just kind of, you know, not take up so much space and just kind of move around and not really knowing. You know, that's why it's so incredible when we see Joe look in the mirror for the first time, because it's the first time I think Joe actually ever looks at himself, because everything comes before Joe. His family, his job. You know, he's an X-ray technician. Their job is to look at things, never to diagnose. So I saw that as a reflection of Joe. He can look at certain things, but his job is to take the picture and then send it off to the doctor to do the diagnosis, not him. So he never really gets the opportunity to look at himself. And, yeah.
And Todd, yeah. Todd, how did you arrive at the look of the film? I know it's shot in Savannah, but the milky, light quality. I mentioned to you that I was blown away by the framing that is very stately.
Yeah, I started immediately to look at movies as I do to prepare for films, and it's the first sort of nonverbal expression of what the film will be is an image book that's basically a communication to myself and from myself to my director of photography. This image book drew from images and I was thinking a lot about Bergman. It was impossible to not think about Persona as this sort of classic original text of the merging, mirroring two women, one of whom is an actress in Persona, and this sort of undertow of dominance that occurs between them. But how that film is framed, and it was so interesting that you brought up when we were just talking before The Graduate, which was another film I was looking at, and you saw a visual link to the simplicity and the minimalism of the camera and the language of the shots in The Graduate, which was definitely something I was thinking about. It's also an older woman, younger man story. I looked at every relative example of that, of course, Sunset Boulevard and Sunday Bloody Sunday. But the thing about The Graduate and the thing about Woody Allen's Manhattan is they're comedies. They're critiques and observations of contemporary culture, but they work because of how they're described visually. and the restraint of the visual language. The cut, when it cuts in The Graduate, and I think you feel this in May, December, the cut means something. It's an event because it ends at a level of anxiety and suspense that you feel when you're locked into these long shots. Now, The Graduate is beautifully shot, and Gordon Willis shot Manhattan, and it's exquisite, and Sven Nykvist shoots Bergman's films. I worked with Chris Blavel on this film, my first time working with Chris, because Ed Lockman got an injury. We loved devising these ideas of the shots and mirrors. But these kinds of shots and these ideas don't work without performances like this. And so the tension is all about what happens once that shot starts and before the shot ends, and how we're trapped. We're sort of caged into those shots, but the creatures we're observing are doing everything.
Yeah, and Julianne, I mentioned to Todd, I think you were there when I was talking to him, that I've greatly admired this man. But the scene in the mirror, in the bathroom, is the greatest scene he's ever shot. In a pantheon of amazing scenes, can you walk us through him directing and you working in that scene?
Well, what a thrill it was to be able to play that scene with Todd's direction and cinematography, and Natalie as my partner. I mean, it's an amazing scene because, of course, it all takes place in one shot with us looking in our reflection, but there is no mirror there. There's just a camera, and there are spots where, I'm seeing myself in the mirror, but I'm seeing Natalie in the mirror, and the same with her. So we're not actually looking at one another, and it's this moment of extreme intimacy, and also this kind of really performative femininity. There's nothing kind of more feminine in a sense than makeup, this idea that you have to put on your femininity. And in this case, it's like Gracie is finally saying to Elizabeth, I'm going to put my face on you so you can feel what it's like to be me. And so as this is happening, they're revealing these major histories to one another. Who Elizabeth's family was, who Gracie's mother was. When Gracie says, she says, "What was your mother like?" She goes, "She was beautiful." So to have that kind of that intimacy, and that it's the place I think where they reveal the most to each other in this masterful shot. One shot. It was exhilarating to perform it that way. It was wonderful to be with Natalie, who's such a superb actor and a wonderful person. And there were weird things too. Just like we were talking about the wig moment. Everyone was very worried about Natalie's wig. We got to get it out of her face, and could we put it in a ponytail? It doesn't look good in a ponytail. All of this, and I was like, I got it. And so the moment of me touching Natalie ends up, which was really just technically to get her hair out of her face, ends up being this moment of real intensity and seduction and intimacy.
And transgression.
Yeah. And then, of course, the two of them, someone was asking about the seductive nature of the relationship, and I said, well, seduction is also another mode of dominance, of power seeking, and they're both very familiar. Like I said, they're in a battle for narrative dominance, these two, but it would also felt kind of tender too.
And I love how you say you're literally putting your face on her, but it's also really the only time in the film where Elizabeth is interviewed. Yeah. And her story is being directly asked about by Gracie. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And going back to the idea of a very deceptive script, it starts like we're watching a portrait of two women, and then all of a sudden it becomes three characters. Tell us about that. To you, Todd. That the fact that all of a sudden the third character sneaks in and almost takes over.
It is due to an incredibly. This is where the script is so not simple. That its foundation is so strong and its coherence is so remarkable. It's structured not only in the 20 years after the fact of the tabloid event and the transgression, the abuse of power by an older woman on a boy, and how a family might survive that, the walls that are built up in all those years that Elizabeth's job is to try to penetrate. And we think that we're going to get to some notion of truth or the real Gracie in that process. That's what she keeps claiming. And you realize that the real Gracie are the stories that she tells about herself. And so you're in this sort of this trap with the two women at a certain, as the power dynamic keeps playing out. And it's in this process that she's also in the process of trying to seduce Joe. And Joe is learning a lot in the process of this movie. But it's in that, but that's a challenging and brilliant and risky balancing act with these two incredibly strong, fierce women who are driven by their wills, and this man who has been basically locked up and stopped in his own growth and his own maturation is finally being asked to take a cognizant look at the world and himself. So that's where, and we need that as an audience. We crave that. And so that's why it becomes the story of this man, because he's where the hope sort of lies.
And Charles, he speaks about this trajectory. He goes from naive character to defiant. And I love the fact that your hobby is butterflies, which is very symbolic to what your journey. Can you tell us about that journey?
Yeah. I could be off with the facts a little bit, but I remember looking at the stages of caterpillars kind of transitioning to monarch butterflies, and I think there's like 4 or 5 stages. You have the pupa stage, then the cocoon stage, right? And I kind of feel like that's where we find Joe. He's still cocooned, and internally. And then with the arrival of Elizabeth, she's slowly starting to kind of crack on that cocoon, and he's slowly kind of rising to the surface throughout the journey of the film. And I feel, with Joe, I think in a way he's almost reliving his experience with Gracie when he was 13, again as a 36-year-old father with Elizabeth. There's that moment in the bedroom scene when he says Gracie, then he jumps back and corrects himself and says Elizabeth, because I feel like there's parallels with that relationship, and that's just...
Charles brought that to the scene. That wasn't in the script.
I mean, it was so... Natalie and Julie, what they would do, I would get confused filming. Wait, why does Gracie look different today? But... and I think it's really beautiful because, with Joe's love for these butterflies and the process of the caterpillars and everything is a reflection of his love for his kids. When there's those 3 little eggs he finds on the leaf, that to me represented his 3 kids. And kind of really the moment, the graduation scene, when he's watching his kids graduate, it's such a joyous moment for him, because his whole life has been his kids and his family, just like loving them, and to see them go into an unknown chapter that he's never experienced was kind of a big, hopeful moment. Someone was like, "Oh, it's like really sad and it's like hopelessness," and I was like, "No, it's hopeful." There's no joy without some sort of like pain or some sort of tragedy, and that's like a very hopeful moment for Joe. And he's on vacation somewhere right now.
Yeah. Todd, dying to ask you about Michel Legran's The Go-Between score and the usage in the movie.
While I was putting together all my images and made my image book, I on TCM. They showed The Go-Between from 1971, a Joseph Losey film starring Julie Christie and Alan Bates. It's a movie that was hugely well regarded, won the Palme d'Or in 71, and had an Oscar nomination for the Best Supporting Actress. But it's fallen out of circulation for some reason in the United States. It's something you you never see. I think I saw it as a kid when it came out, but I had never seen it since. And I'm watching this movie, and that score asserts itself like it does in May, December, in the opening credits before anything happens. Da-dum, da-dum, you know. And you're like, what? And the movie is a coming-of-age story about a boy, a 12-year-old boy in the turn of the century who goes to his rich family's friend's house, falls in love, gets his crush on his beautiful older sister, becomes a go-between between the older sister of a very wealthy class and a farmhand played by Alan Bates. And but that music puts you in a state of enforced interpretation. You are constantly questioning what the film is unveiling to you. You're looking at every square inch of the frame for a clue as to where this is going. And I was like, that's what we need for May, December. That sense of an excited, pleasurable sense of questioning and reading the film that I felt in the script. And so I just laid in the cues from the go-between on the plane to Savannah as an example for my composer to just say, Marcello, this is what we should go for something like this. And he was like, wow, this is amazing. It breaks every rule of like what scores in movies should do, and very exciting. And so we just played it. We played it on the very first setup of the very first day. That would happen to be a scene where I thought music should play when Natalie's driving up to the community center for the flower arranging class. And I said, Ben, hit it. And my assistant. And all this blares out of the speakers, and the whole crew goes, what the fuck? What is this movie? You know? And we did that through the entire film. When we would turn it down if we were recording dialogue and turn it right back up if the dialogue ended. And so it put everybody with the image book in everyone's head, all these things, because we had such a short amount of time. I needed to, had to, and loved sharing all the creative choices with everybody. So we were all on the same page, and with the actors, of course. So we were all feeling this, and it was informing the camera movements and the speed of that zoom into the refrigerator and all the pans that we're doing. And so we're all in the same, tonal place, or atonal place. And then I cut the film to the score with Fonzie, my editor, and then I had to go to Marcello and say, with my tail between my legs, geez, I think we need to adapt this score part, this melodic phrase. The centerpiece of this score is what he adapted and made his own. And he really did make it his own. That mirror scene has all this there's so many other elements of music that are Marcello's that make this film one whole experience.
Yeah. Now, I know the actors are playing it, very straight, but the movie is deliciously funny. Can you tell us about finding the tone of the movie?
I don't know that we knew how it would play. You just are making it, right?
Yeah, it did not feel funny.
No. I mean, we were laughing in between takes, but not.
There are some things that I think feel uncomfortable, and they'll be funny in that sense too. Right. I think the line, I don't think we have enough hot dogs. I knew was funny because it has this huge musical punctuation at the end of it, and it's a zoom into a refrigerator, and it's her sense of what she cares about and what's important, and so of course the audience is outside of that going like, well, that doesn't seem to be urgent. It seems funny, right? But then, like what Sammy has done so beautifully, and what Todd, of course, is like conducting through it, is a sense of like, what is this mythology about what is important in American culture or feminine culture? It's like, you have a barbecue, and there's red, white, and blue, and girls act this way, and boys act this way, and it's graduation, that's a sacred day, and the family is sacred. So, all of these mythologies are plotted throughout the film. And of course, because Todd zoomed out and we're observing it, sometimes that stuff seems funny. But then you realize, well, it's urgent. You know, the tension, I think, between their urgency and our distance makes things funny sometimes.
I think in your future career reels, Julianne, that I don't think we have enough hot dogs is going to be included. I want to ask you about the final monologue of Natalie Portman and playing it directly to the camera, and she's phenomenal. That performance is phenomenal. Yeah, can you tell us about?
It was really the thing. I read it in Sammy's script, and I was like, it reminded me of a scene from a Bergman film, not Persona, the film Winter Light, where Ingrid Thulin delivers a letter to the central character, the priest, an unrequited love letter, and it's played like that in a symmetrical frame, looking right into the lens, like no other scene in the film, I believe. Plays, and I saw it as a teenager, and I was just like, oh my God, that is so remarkable. It's relying entirely on a performance like Ingrid Thulin's. This was going to be a place for this actor to come to a place, and it reveals so much about what's so interesting about it in the script and in the film is that it reveals so much about Natalie, that she's almost the most honest when she's completely in this sort of, she's this transformative, almost onanistic state of having become Gracie. And so she's looking right into the lens, and it's sort of a cosmic mirror at this point in the movie. But you also, in the same way, you learn more about Gracie than you ever have in the movie, because it's this document from the past when Gracie was in love with, it was a private letter between Gracie and Joe. And so you also have insight to the past. So there's all these sort of repeats of motifs that run through the film between the two women in the variety of various Joes who stand in for who he is. That our Joe is seen through all the multiplicities of Joes who are being cast in the movies, in the Son, Charlie. So all that stuff feels like it's reaching coherence and cohesion by the end of the film. And that performance just takes it to the,
And Julianne, yes, amazing. And Julianne, inhabiting Gracie, you let go, you don't judge her. You just have empathy for her and work on the character?
Look, I think that in terms of, what I try to do is try to have empathy and understanding for any human being when you're kind of constructing something and pulling it apart. I think that she's a dangerous person, I think that, and so it would be for me to say I don't walk away. I don't gaslight myself when I'm making a movie and say no, she was good. No, I'm very, very aware that this is somebody who has transgressed greatly. Right, and to me personally, it's an egregious and dangerous transgression, and so my responsibility is to think about what the cost of that is to the people around her, to Joe in particular, to her family or community at large, and to herself. And so that was where I was so kind of excited about Sammy's script, because she allows these private moments for Gracie where you do see what the cost of it is. When somebody said, she starts crying because the cake order is canceled, that's not why she's crying. You're not hysterical. You don't fall apart in every private moment unless you have a huge sense of remorse and regret and shame. And so the tension between her, what she's created and what she's projecting is huge, right? Huge. So I thought a lot about that, and I thought about, what that makes her like, how she feels, and how she feels to others around her, and the power that she wields, and the destruction that she wields. And so I don't know that any of that is without judgment, but I mean, I think she was a complicated. And she's a dangerous person, I think. Yeah.
And last but not least, Todd, what is it like 5 times working with your muse here?
There's no real words to, because people say, how has that relationship evolved over time? And of course, every script and project and adventure and risk is different. But the Julianne I met on my second feature film, Safe, and it was this actor who, at the very beginning of her career on the big screen, was fully formed and understood things about the character that I didn't. And this is true for somebody I just met, Charles, on this film. He understood things about Joe that I didn't. And I could see the story in his audition. And I could see who Carol White really was in Flesh and Blood in what Julianne did for me in the room in front of me. And there are sometimes, there are examples working with Julie where I can't even see what she's doing in the room. It's not until I see the dailies that I see what she's doing, because it's so minute. And the calibration that she understands of this medium and what the lens sees, and a balance between transparency and inscrutability, and never being, never having to do that thing that so many actors do, which is fall in love with their character and be on the side of their character in some sentimental way. No, it's not that. You know, you can't be, Cirque said it in a beautiful way. I won't get the exact phrasing right, but you can't be, the actor and the director can't be on the side of the values of the film. That's what he called it, was eindeutig, which is with only one meaning. When you try to align yourself with the moral and ethical goals of your character, and they affirm your own identity, that's eindeutig. And we like a lot of meanings to be colliding, you know, and keeping you thinking and questioning and uncertain and uncomfortable.
The thing I want to say about Todd is that obviously he's somebody of such immense talent and this and intellect and this formidable knowledge of cinema and how you tell a story. But I think what he has in combination with that is this incredible humanity and interest in behavior and gender and culture and identity, and also a joyfulness too about it, about who we are as people and how we relate to one another. And the thing that I listen for, and this has been the same since the very beginning with Safe, is that I listen for him laughing on set, because I know that's when he is most pleased, when he has what he wants. To the extent that sometimes you have to be like, Todd, stop laughing.
She sent me out of the room.
Yeah. I'm like, you're gonna ruin this take. But he's so joyful and so committed and so invested and so loving as a director and a person and a filmmaker. It's a combination that I think is just extraordinary. He's an extraordinary filmmaker.
Yeah. Well, the three of you are brilliant, and thank you for honoring us by being here.
Thank you for having
Thanks, you guys.
us.
Absolutely.
Thank you, everybody.